allyship is something that's very important. It's the Racial Justice Committee and forums for this, I firmly believe, should not be occasions where the racialized come together and share stories and lament about what's happening, but it's also a forum for allies, those that are not racialized, to come together and together confront this evil that is very much part of our systems and institutions, and be it the church, be it the larger society, or wherever it be. This is something that we experience in different ways all over the world. And again, as a legacy of colonialism, racism and white privilege has been something that we've been experiencing in the West, especially in Canada and the US and the Americas, I mean, and that is a reality. And we'll go through some of these definitions, and I just thought I would point that out, and as to how it is, at least in the West, a legacy of colonialism, and also historically the slave trades and all other things that I need not point out to you at this point. And so, as I said, I would like a conversation. I'd like some responses about how would you understand racism? What is racism?
To me, racism seems to be built around resentment of some kind. Whether it's because of ethnicity, because sometimes racism, in my experience, has nothing to do with somebody who is of a different skin tone. It's simply because they're not the same as, and so it seems to be built around resentment, around difference.
The way I see it, coming from a country that is up north and all white, and I mean, there's indigenous folks up north, but they are very much part of the Finnish culture too. To me, it is when we focus on our differences and we categorize people based on those differences. And of course, physical differences are the easiest to see far away. Nobody really knows that my English isn't like your English until I talk. And so it takes a little bit of time and conversation with me, well, few words anyway, to realize that my English isn't as yours is. But skin color is something that can be seen. Being having different looking eyes, you can see right away. All that kinds of physical characteristics are exposed more.
All I wanted to say was that it seems to me that it has a lot to do with a feeling of superiority, so that when you stand beside or look at other people, and I think of how in the slave movement, how the slaves were not considered humans at all, and it's so to me it's a sense of superiority.
We heard a quote various things, resentment about the other being different, and categorizing people based on differences, and having to do with superiority, having to do with power. And those are words that stood out in the responses or in the comments that we just heard. And normally people often associate racism with acts of abuse or harassment. It's only then that it comes up. However, should it involve violent or intimidating behavior? And so that's something I thought I'll just read the definition that the committee put out when it was still the Racial Justice Advisory Committee. And I wouldn't want to go through all of them, but what is race? Race, according to the definition we have, is a social construct which artificially divides people into distinct groups based on characteristics such as physical appearance, particularly skin color, cultural affiliation, or ethnic classification. Again, and a lot of folks also may look at race and equate race and ethnicity, but here there is a slight distinction made, and where ethnicity includes common language, ancestral, geographic location, religion, and cultural heritage. But race includes that also, but is beyond that, is what I was trying to say. And the other definition that I thought we should keep in mind, even as we go over racism, is the whole notion of prejudice. And there are a lot of folks who think that they are synonymous, race and prejudice, because prejudice is literally prejudging of another person or group of people negatively or positively based on assumptions and stereotypes that prevent objective consideration of a behavior or situation. Prejudice, and again, in our normal use of that word, it always has a negative connotation. You're prejudiced towards someone. But then interestingly, it need not be. You can be positively prejudiced against someone too. And discrimination, unfair treatment of a person or group based on prejudice. But then is racism just prejudice? That's where I thought we'll just quickly go over this, and also about how we can understand what this whole thing is about. It's the belief that one race is superior, reinforced by corporate or institutional power and privilege. The power to impact negatively in systemic ways on another group or person. In Canada, it's the experience of people of color, including Indigenous peoples, within a structure that favors white people. Sometimes racism is very simple and sometimes nuanced, sometimes overt, and sometimes deep inside us. And many times we may not be even aware that we are acting in a racist manner. And so, given that and the other one, yes, the whole notion of white privilege. What is that about? It's the social construct which theorizes that white people are superior to all others. Consciously or unconsciously, white people are privileged and given preference in law and societal norms, which reinforce a dominant culture of whiteness as a standard for all groups. White privilege is not earned. It cannot be given away. And there's no choice of non-participation. Again, I am reminded of the caste structures in India, where you're born into it, whether you like it or not, whether you accept it or not. And so in that context, let's just look at the three important things that influence the whole notion of how we define racism. I would say the three would be history, institutions that we are part of, and power. I would always say that power, the whole notion of reverse racism is something that I've heard, even when I was in the States. There was a friend of mine who would always talk of reverse racism. They do this, they do that, and blah, blah. But then again, when you associate power with the whole understanding of racism, that's something that flows from those that can exercise power over the other, who is the target of a particular behavior or a particular system. So why is history important in understanding racism? Because it gives us explanations of why some races face it. For example, look at our own context. All of us are familiar with, now suddenly my mind goes blank, the doctrine of discovery and the documents associated with that. And so the indigenous people face a number, in spite of the treaties, but then again, as to how the laws were formed and defined, the indigenous folks in this country still face barriers to live a dignified life as compared to the white settlers here, or even other settlers, if we want to, because by virtue of association, some of us who are privileged are here, in spite of being racialized also, could fall into that liminal space where you can't excuse yourself of participating in racism. And so primarily it's the indigenous people in this land that have been suffering, and they, for example, getting a job, they are less likely to be selected for jobs, and they have much lower living standards. Even now, we are talking of potable drinking water for those communities in a lot of places. Though the federal government had promised that that would be an area of focus, it's still happening. And or health, education, all these, they're denied what the rest of the country is provided, and so leads to higher suicide rates, emotional issues, and self-esteem issues. So all of this, it's because, and we need to know history and as to why it happens. And sometimes there are those who may say, oh, that happened long ago, but then it's been hundreds of years of colonialism, and then even after that, it's the settlers who have the last word and not the indigenous people. So that's one example of how history is important, and all other areas also we could see as to how historically we need to look at a particular issue. And why are institutions important in perpetuating racism? For example, schools, the court systems, the media, the organizations, everywhere. It's so structured that those that are not in power, those that does not have influence, and a simple thing could be, I love saying that the judicial system here, we talk about justice, but is the legal system just? That's a question that I would always raise, because the legal system is always, if you look at, for example, a number of cases that when, because the laws were that way, the indigenous or the colored folks were denied what was duly theirs. It was legal, but was not just. And that's where I would distinguish between that. Again, righteousness and the kingdom of God, and justice, when we talk of it in terms of those, so the systems itself need to be, and institutions need to be changed, and policies, and all those, and we can go on, and but I am aware of the time also. And power and racism. Power is an important thing that we need to keep in mind when we talk of racism. And our institutions and our history, they work together by creating an imbalance of power based on race. And for example, I read this article where the writer uses this example. Why is it that a Black person can use the N-word? Because you see them, see it in the lyrics and they use it freely. Or why an Asian person can make jokes about their own race or their accent or whatever. Because it was very interesting that the argument of this person was there is no imbalance of power there. They are part of that system, the ones that they are the racialized. But when someone from the dominant race uses certain language or makes stereotypical jokes about another race that lacks the same historical and institutional power, that is racism. That is racial expression. And so that is something that we need to keep in mind. It's one way. And as I mentioned earlier, the whole notion of reverse racism, I would say you can't talk of it if you understand what racism is all about. And yeah, you can talk about hatred and prejudice. That's a different thing. And so it's not just language that can be racist, and there are a whole lot of other ways in which someone can be. So what does racism look like?
A number of years ago, I was walking at night. I was alone. And so I was walking in this direction and someone was approaching me, and that was, the person was Black. And I remember as I approached and we passed each other, I thought to myself, see, I'm not afraid. And my next thought was, I'm not racist. And then my next thought was, oh, damn. Because if I really wasn't, I wouldn't have had the thought, right? And I had this, right? I was married at the time, right? I mean, I'm the only white person who lives in my house. And yet still, I had the thought. It wasn't malicious, but in that moment, I saw inside of myself that I still see the difference, right? I still thought, it was such a stark moment for me. And it is proof to me, right? And that's only one instance, but proof to me that even I have a lot of work to do.
Mine is also an anecdote. I worked in law offices, and I worked in a very large law firm working with student lawyers, and they would have to put in their time in order throughout their education path. And the habit was to hire these people back because the firm was able to conduct a very lengthy interview process as to talent and ability. And we had a couple of students who worked through their year and then went off to finish their last year in university and would come then be granted their legal degree. And one of them did come back, and the one that came back was a BIPOC person. And I was in the lunchroom, and there was a group of people sitting there chit-chatting about how come, you know, I'll call him James, came back and not William. And the decision made among the group was because, well, you know, James is BIPOC, and we needed to have more non-white persons in the firm. And there was just very serious group of nods around the table, as though ability, because this person had a skin that was not white, ability was not part of the process. And I just thought, wow, I think that's racism.
I think there's a lot to the white superiority or supremacy or whatever you want to call it. I don't remember all the terminologies, how it quite went. But sometimes I think it's a non-thinking response that we do that is part of the racism. In a walk that I took with my family, I would look at the people come towards me and I'd smile and I'd say hello. And this other couple came and I didn't say something. And as soon as the person was gone, my son called me on it. And I thought, well, I didn't say anything because they didn't make eye contact. But he interpreted right away that I was racist. And I'm glad he called me on it because it made me think about it. But I didn't not say hello because of the skin color. It was because of the lack of eye contact. Yeah, the racism is there, and we don't necessarily think about it. And I think that that is the biggest injustice that we're doing to ourselves, is to not think about it and then to just go on our merry way.
Again, racism is expressed and experienced in various ways. And they would say, you could look at, just as was explained, it was not intentional. So it could be very casual or indirect, or even not unaware of how one is behaving. And sometimes it appears in the form of microaggression and intentional or unintentional offensive messages that target people who are different and that about whom we have resentment. And you can look at various examples for one that is used quite widely is maybe we don't use public transportation as much here, but in places where they do, one thing that they talk about is if there's a person of color sitting and that seat is vacant and that's the only seat vacant, there are those who would prefer to stand and would not want to sit there. And I remember in one of our committee meetings, one of the earlier ones, one of the members saying, I realized that I was doing something very wrong when I thought about it. And if a person of color came close to this person in a store, my hands go a little tighter around my purse. But there is also direct racism. This is where unintentional, casual racism, we could look at it that way. Then direct racism, which would be where intentional, and that's where these posters are asking people to go back home, and then there is issues, and also insulting messages on social groups, and various ways in which that is made manifest. I need not go into that. But then we also have systemic racism, where that, again, I would like to point out, I don't know how many of us saw this video about this 14-year-old kid in a mall in New Jersey 6 days ago. He got into a fight with another kid, a white kid who was a couple of years older. They were arguing, and this, it's only from there that the video coverage, someone took it and posted it, and they come to blows. And then it came to a point where the 14-year-old color black kid was on the floor and this other guy was kneeling on top, and suddenly 2 cops come, and there were seats there where the fight was going on. They pull the guy, the white kid, on top, ask him to sit down, and jump on this other kid, and one officer had the knee on just behind the shoulder and the other had the knee on the lower back, and they handcuffed him and literally threw him onto the couch. And this other, the white kid, had his hands up, thought he was going to be handcuffed, and then realized, and later he made a statement, why did they do it that way? He had the sensitivity to know that that was wrong. That is where we find systemic racism, where our systems and institutions are shaped in a way that we respond in a particular way, and people not being able to buy homes in particular neighborhoods.
This is important work for us to just be willing to have the conversations and to look inside of ourselves. My invitation to all of you would be to do the work to learn more about what it means to be an ally. I always say it cannot be the work of the oppressed to set themselves free, right? So if we think about feminism and women's votes, women can't get all we want until men also work for women to become equal. And the same is true in terms of racial justice, that until the dominant race and culture really, really wants equity and equality and God's vision to be what we all experience, then it isn't actually going to get better. And so it is our work, it is our call as people who experience privilege to do everything that we can